Great to be joined again by Angus Gidley-Baird, the Senior Proteins Analyst at Rabobank. Angus, how are you going today?
Good, thanks, Ricky. Yourself?
I'm pretty good. Things have been a bit rough on the market front for beef producers, but you've got some positive news on the export front. We'll start there.
Yeah, we've just released our Global Beef Quarterly, and in there we have a bit of a feature article looking at what the situation is in the US at the moment. They're going through a very dry season. They're liquidating a lot of cows at the moment, historically high numbers, something similar to what we saw back in 2011 and 12. And we're expecting, once they move through this dry season and start to rebuild focus, there'll be a shortage of US beef. They'll be looking for increased volumes being imported. There'll also be less US beef on that global market as well. So some positive upside for global prices.
Yeah, that's an upside, but the big downside on the domestic market has been the tumble, I guess, in a overall sense on the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator. Is it the younger cattle where things are really falling off?
Yeah, we've seen the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator, so weaner class cattle. We've seen feeder cattle as well drop. It probably started dropping a little bit earlier. All of them have seen quite a significant drop. And in the context of things, it seems like a big drop, but I think reality is that, cattle prices have been fairly inflated for a while now. And, I think where it's heading is probably something that's a little bit more reasonable given we're starting to see some pressures at the consumer end of the supply chain. Just, concerns about where the economy's heading, the real incomes that are out there, and people will be shopping to budgets and be a little bit more conscious on what they're paying.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective that it might be about, I guess, on the demand side. I did wonder, and no pun intended here, whether the market was a bit saturated with stock and farmers were maybe just letting go of a bit because they couldn't hold so much.
I don't think so. I mean, there are parts of Australia, definitely, southern areas that are affected by wet weather and floods at the moment. But really, southern areas with the rain that they've had would be looking at a fairly positive summer. I would imagine a good feed base that's out there. And if you move into the northern areas, there's still large parts of Queensland, Central Queensland, Northern Territory that are probably describe themselves as able to carry more stock if the season's improved. So I don't think we've reached that point where we've got an oversupply of cattle. I think it's probably just producer demand has probably eased off a little bit. As we're moving towards Christmas, people deciding, maybe I'm right with the numbers that I've got. But also some of that sort of consumer end of the supply chain feeding back up through to processor demand will just be a bit softer.
Well, let's look at sheep. We expect during spring for the numbers to climb a bit, and it's sort of been stop-start, but it's still on the rise and looking pretty good for farmers.
Yeah, sheep market, the lamb market's looking pretty good. It's been a bit bumpy as well with prices. I was looking the other day, just this morning at the trade lamb indicator, it got up to $8, back to $7.50, bumped around a bit, but I think, it'll probably hold about there. It will be interesting to see the numbers come through, obviously, particularly those southern states affected by rain and flood at the moment, whether or not there are some numbers that might be delayed, whether that's just delayed getting stock off property or whether it's, delayed in terms of finishing if they're having to move sheep and lambs out of paddocks, etc. But, I am expecting some larger numbers this season just because of the favourable seasons, better joining rates, better lambing rates, higher ewe numbers in the system. So, that will keep a lid on price rises. But, where they are at the moment, I think is fairly reasonable.
Yeah, I noticed across that trade lamb indicator, when you look at the local markets, there's a pretty wide range of pricing variability as well. You look at Hamilton, say, $668, but then Ballarat, $807. Why are we getting such, big variations between places that aren't terribly far apart?
No, and I mean, you throw in Western Australian prices there, and they're well below the East Coast too. There's some interesting dynamics at play. Obviously, different processors have different markets that they're supplying into. Domestic market, I'm still hearing that it's reasonably okay, but I think, lamb is a fairly high-priced protein. The consumer, we have heard, is now shopping, cost-conscious consumer is shopping to a budget. They will be looking for the cheaper alternative, which might mean a bit of a softening. We're probably seeing a little bit of a drop in volumes. The US market has eased from where it was at the beginning of the year, but still historically high. I am hearing that, there are some volume pickups to places like the Middle East. So I think it's still pretty good, but it's probably a case of ebbs and flows of when stock are getting onto the market, given weather conditions, and also access into some of those global markets. You know, you do hear comments about some freezers and stock levels building in some markets, and it might just be a case of there are a few lumps in the system that cause those prices to jump a bit.
Sounds to me, Angus, like we might need to talk about choice cuts of meat and a lamb roast for Christmas, just to get the market up and about.
Oh, definitely. I know MLA do a wonderful job in marketing lamb, and the Australia Day lamb ads do see a bit of a lift in lamb through late January, but maybe we bring it forward. Yeah, lamb for Christmas dinner, maybe.
Excellent stuff. Angus Gidley-Baird from Rabobank, thanks for joining us today on Flow.
No worries. Thanks, Ricky.